Hello and welcome to another Into the Terminal. Today we're going to be talking about the Tmux command. So if you've not seen this before, it's a way that you can kind of protect your sessions, and that's I think how it originally got started. Nate, why don't we jump into the terminal and we'll take a look at it.
Absolutely. Here we go.
All right, so to start it up, you just run Tmux. And you'll notice that it runs a shell inside of another application. And down here at the bottom, it tells me that this is session 0, and this is what's being run inside of that session. And so I could do something like run a really long process. Right, so I just took a never-ending stream of zeros and send them to a device that accepts all input, and I put it in the background so it'll just run forever, right? And in fact, if I run jobs, there it is. And thanks to me running DD, you can actually see how much data it's transferred. So there it is running. It's already transferred 9.3 gigs of data between these two virtual devices. But what's cool about Tmux is that I can detach from it. So Control B and then a D character. And I've detached from it. And if I do a Tmux ls, right, there's my session 0. And if I reattach to it, right, there it is. And if I again kill a sig user 1, right, it's been writing data this whole time, right? So even though I detached from it, that session was there in the background, running along, doing its thing. And one of the places where we use this a lot is when we do something like connect to a remote system. So if we connect it to a remote system and something happens, like my SSH connection gets dropped because of packet loss or some weird routing hiccup or whatever, whatever you're running in the foreground of that shell gets killed, and it would be lost. So if you're in the middle of something like, I don't know, maybe you were installing the satellite server on this machine, and it only got part of the way through. Was that something you could easily resume? Probably not. And maybe it was destructive, as it was like kind of halfway done. You don't know where it stopped and what happened. So you need to like throw the machine away and start again. Whereas if you instead protected that session with Tmux, you could re-SSH back, attach to your Tmux session where all those jobs were running, and they'd still be running. So that's where I've used it the most. How about you, Nate?
Yeah, I used to have to do a lot of remote upgrades in my sysadmin days, and that's exactly where I would use it, right? Like I'd be running a long running upgrade job. And I don't just mean OS updates, because DNF is pretty good about resuming that kind of stuff. But a workload that you're running has a long update process, or a script that has to run after the update is done to convert data. I would personally use Screen for this, because that was just the tool I was used to. We'll talk a little bit more about Tmux versus Screen just a little bit out in the deeper dive. But yeah, it saved my bacon a number of times, because you'd be working from home, it'd be 2 a.m. trying to do a maintenance thing, and like your ISP would decide now's the time I need to upgrade our cable infrastructure, and you drop off.
Right. Because
right?
like nobody works at 2 o'clock in the morning, Nate.
Exactly. Everyone's asleep.
So I just set up this situation that we're just talking about, right? I have another machine in my environment. I SSH into it, Tmuxed, and then ran my long-running command, right? And then I disconnected from the box. But you can see if I reconnect and I do a Tmux ls, right? There's my session. And if I do a Tmux attach, it's still there and running the whole time. So you're protecting your remote session, and you can do long-running jobs without having be killed. And now, Nate, do you know why things are killed when you disconnect from a machine?
Because they're running within the process of your shell, and when your shell exits, it kills everything that was in there.
Yeah, and do you know there's actually a special signal that's sent to all those jobs? This is your Linux trivia for the day.
Yeah, I don't know what the signal is.
Yeah. So remember back in the olden days, we had modems,
Yes.
and you would like really old. There's a little cradle where you put your handset.
Uh-huh.
Ready to disconnect, you would pick the handset up out of the cradle and you'd hang it
Hang
up.
it up. Right.
And so when you disconnect, all your jobs are sent the hang up signal.
Ah, there you go.
Disconnecting, and that's how they all get killed, is because like the user that controls them hung up, so we don't need them anymore. And
My
Tmux
God.
protects that.
This makes me wonder how many younger folks don't even understand the concept of physically hanging up a receiver, right? And like they just see the buttons on their phone as like, why does it look like a little horseshoe? I don't understand.
Right. uh, all right, so we're going to be doing more on Tmux. This is like super basic. Tmux is really complex,
We can get a lot
because
deeper on Tmux. And
yeah,
I
there's all,
guarantee there's stuff that we won't cover that everyone's like, why didn't you touch on this? So please leave comments and let us know what your favorite Tmux things are.
yeah. So we'll be covering. It turns out Tmux has a whole bunch of ways to structure that data that you are attached to. So we'll be talking about panes and windows and sessions and switching between them all and config files. There's nonstop fun after we
All
return.
kinds of fun. All the fun. All right. Well, we'll see you after the break. Telling you, I'm going to keep lobbying for some sort of a noise that plays when that thing goes. Some kind of swoosh. I don't know.
Swoosh, a floof.
Yeah.
Uh, so Nate, we didn't always use Tmux.
That's
That's a
true.
more recent change to RHEL, right? I think we moved to Tmux in RHEL 8. For a long time, we used something else.
Yeah, that utility was screen, and it does a lot. I shouldn't say a lot. It does some of the same things. Mainly the attaching, reattaching, detaching that Tmux does. You could do with screen, and that was the tool that I used for years to protect my sessions. I would just connect to a remote system, and the first thing I did was run screen, which we're going to touch on a more convenient way to do that too a little bit later in the show.
Right on.
But yeah,
So
it didn't do the window splitting, and it didn't do things like that. At least not that I'm aware of.
yeah, and if you are a diehard screen fan, you can still get it. It just doesn't come with Red Hat Enterprise Linux anymore.
Right.
Instead, you have to get it from the extra packages for Enterprise Linux repo.
Which I think is fine. Right. I'm glad that you can still get screen because I have a lot of fond memories of screen.
So you just install it so you can look at it from afar,
Just like,
kind of like
look,
a
there's
painting, and be like,
screen.
I appreciate that software.
I appreciate screen. No, there were some things. There was one thing specifically that we talked about before the show that screen did that Tmux does not, that I kind of miss, and that was to be able to connect to a serial port. And I know a lot of people probably don't care about that, but if you ever have to connect to a serial console from a Linux machine, you need something to do that connection with. And screen was really lightweight and simple to get that done with, and that's why I liked it.
Yeah. So shall we jump back into more Tmuxing?
Yeah, I mean that is the point of the show today, right? So here we go.
All right. So let me start up another Tmux session, and we're going to start by talking about sessions in Tmux. So there we go. I'm in a Tmux session. I mentioned in the critical path that down here, this is its name and what it's running. So it's Tmux session 0. Now I've seen a whole bunch of different ways that people will like organize their sessions, whether they be screen or Tmux or whatever. In one of my former roles, we would open a session and connect it to a remote host. And so it made sense to name this thing the remote host, right? So I can do something like that. And then I'm actually going to name it with this client, right? So I'm going to use Control B. So that's a Control and B pressed at the same time. That's a signal to Tmux that you're about to send it a command to do something. And the command I'm going to use is $sign. Notice down here it says rename. Let's call it client. Right. So here we are.
There you go.
And if I Control B D to disconnect again, and do a Tmux ls. So I have two Tmuxes. I have the one that I used earlier in the critical path, and now I have client. So I can also rename things outside of Tmux. So I could use a Tmux. I'm just going to name a new one. How about new session dash S?
You typoed Tmux, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Not Tmux.
Tmux.
All right. So if I do a Control B and D to disconnect, there we go. So I now have three, right? I have session ID 0, session ID super awesome, which I just made, and
awesome.
session ID client, which I renamed from within Tmux. All right, so now that I have three, if I just do Tmux attach, it'll attach me to one of them. And it turns out it attaches me to like the one that's alphabetically ordered first. So I go back to 0. But what if I want to attach to one of these others, like client, right? So I can do a Tmux attach client. And that'll resume the Tmux session that I've got. But Tmux is actually kind of slick in that you don't have to use the exact name of the session you want to reconnect to. You only have to use enough of it that's unique for it to figure out. So I could just do a Tmux cli. Try that again. Session cli. Let's try it again.
Making a liar out of you.
It is making a liar. I tested it before the thing. Oh, you know what it is? Dash T.
You say it. Oh.
Yeah.
This is why we copy and paste, Scott.
I know. All right, so you can use enough that it's unique, and then it'll attach you that one because it was able to figure out which one you were actually talking about, right? So Control BD. If I wanted to attach to super awesome, I could just do capital S.
Super. Oh, look at that, just S.
Yeah, because none of the others here start with a capital S. So that's good enough. But yeah, super would also work because that's equally as disambiguated. Look at that $5 word, Nate. Disambiguated.
Disambiguated. It's a big word.
Yeah. So the other thing is once you're in a session, what if you want to look at one of the other ones, but you don't want to leave Tmux and come back and have to type that attach session command again? So there's a Tmux internal command to do that. So if you do a Control B and a parenthesis, that moves you to the next session. And so there are two parentheses on the keyboard, right? There's the open parenthesis and the close parenthesis. And that determines which one of those you use, determines whether you're moving forward in your alphabetic list or moving backward in your alphabetic list. So if you do a Control B closed parenthesis, you're moving forward in your list. And if you do a Control B open parenthesis, you're moving backward in your list. So you can just kind of like move around from within Tmux between the different sessions that you have. All right. When you exit a session, just like I did, it actually will kill off the entire session. Like when I typed the word exit to close the shell that was running in it. So Tmux ls. All right, so I was connected to the client session. And because I exited all the shells and all the processes that were running there, it went ahead and
closed the session.
Yep.
That's handy. Cleans things up for you.
Yep. So Nate, shall we get into windows or pane splitting inside of our session?
Yeah, because that's actually one of the nice features of Tmux that I never really knew I needed until I started tinkering with Tmux.
All right. So inside of Tmux, you can also create additional shells inside of this terminal. So you can split Tmux's window into multiple windows, although they call them panes. So let's talk about how this is a single pane, right? Because it's one shell is the entirety of your terminal session here.
It is full of pain.
Yep, it's full pane. So if I do Control B and double quote, now I have 2 panes. And I can run a command in one, like following a log. And then I can move my cursor back to the other one by hitting Control B and an arrow key to navigate to the different panes, right? So I'm in the bottom one. So if I wanted to move to the top one, what direction would I be going, Nate?
Up.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a Control B and the up arrow. Control B up arrow. And now I'm in the top. And so I can run another command like systemctl restart HTTPD. And you can see that there's logs being generated in the bottom of that log file that I'm following. And so I use this layout a lot when I'm doing troubleshooting because it allows me to like look at log data and in the other window or the other pane, do the commands that I need to generate the output that I can then look at the logs to see additional error messages or what have you. But wait, there's more. You can keep splitting things. So I could keep splitting horizontally and I just have more slivers of windows here.
Just smaller and smaller slivers until you can't read them anymore.
Yes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move down by doing Control B and down. So now I'm down in the bottom pane and I'm going to do a Control B %. So Control B % splits a pane vertically. And I can still navigate around with the arrows, right? So Control B up would take me to the top. Control B left arrow would move me back to the pane where I'm running my logs. And I now have a new shell. And so maybe I'm going to do something like, I don't know, top. And I'm going to move over here to where I'm doing the logs, and I'm going to cancel that. Instead, I'm going to watch df-hp. And then I'm going to move to the top pane again. And I'm going to generate a big file. Oh, if equals dev 0 of equal. Oh, no, that's not right. Oh, dev 0. Sorry, not dev null. There we go. All right.
There you go.
So what we're looking at is I'm running the command up top. Down below, every 2 seconds, I'm running df-hp. And so you'll see the dev SDA2 line right here.
Slowly gets fuller and fuller.
Yeah, because I'm like creating this big file that's using up that disk space. And then over here in my top, there's a process that's using a lot of CPU time, and that's probably my DD that's running. And
Right.
when I kill off my DD, notice that my top changes, but my DF stays the same because I haven't deleted that file yet. But this is another thing you'll notice is that top, not overly helpful because of the size of the pane. Things like the process ID name is off, or process name rather, is off the side. I can't see it because it doesn't fit in this window. So when you're going through and like setting up something like this, where you're going to run a command and you're going to have a couple of observational panes where you're seeing what's happening on the machine, you do want to be a little bit careful that your panes don't get so small that the data that's showed there is not helpful, right? Because you could do silly things like Control B parenthesis, Control B double quote. Whoops, Control B double quote. Right, you can get really tiny.
All kinds of, yeah.
That's what you want to do, but the smaller your screen real estate, the more difficult it is to read. Maybe if I had a graphical terminal and I could make it like bigger on my screen.
Bigger, yep.
much helpful.
Yep.
But then
So
maybe we'd have to with GUI.
there's comments in the chat from LS Dowdle, who's a new viewer. I don't remember seeing them in the chat earlier or before. So, welcome to the show. But they're dropping a whole bunch of really cool ideas and things to try inside of Tmux. So if folks are watching the stream and not watching the chat, you might want to check that out. Got some really good suggestions in there. They mentioned zoom in and zoom out in panes. I've never tried that. I don't know if you have, Scott.
I
But
have not.
apparently there's a feature where you can zoom on panes. I don't know exactly how that operates, but I figured I'd just mention it. He said that it's helpful when you're dealing with panes. I don't know if that like brings a pane to the foreground or if it makes the text bigger or smaller. I'm not sure, but anyway, there it is. Maybe look into that.
Yeah. So we showed you like how to create a whole bunch of different panes and how to separate vertically and horizontally and all that. Just like our Tmux session, if we exit and we kill the process that's running in that pane, it closes it, right? So
Right.
we don't have to be stuck with our layout. If we're unhappy, we can customize again. So Control B Z. Let's see what happens there. Let me make a couple more.
Going off script.
I know. Control B Z.
What could go wrong?
There you go. It just brings
there you
it
go.
up.
It brings it to the foreground. I just do it again to set it back. I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly
there
what
you go.
Do. That's
so
very
there you
cool.
go.
Great.
See
Great. This is why you come into the terminal. Everybody learns, even the hosts.
This is why you come to the live stream, because we wouldn't have learned that if he hadn't showed up in our live stream.
All right. So Nate, you were going to talk about managing windows.
Yeah. So let me switch our screen shares here. All right. So this looks really familiar, right? Because it's a similar, same lab environment that we're working in. So along with sessions, there's also this concept of windows, which are basically collections of panes inside of sessions, right? So if I open up Tmux, I'm just going to open it, bare, nothing special here. And then if I do a Control B and then the letter C, we'll create a new window, right? Now, inside of that window, I'm going to do some things so that just sort of to differentiate this window from the other one. I'm going to make some more panes. Let's see. Let's make a. Oh, I did something. Oh, I'm trying to rename it. Sorry. That's what I wanted to show you next. You can rename the windows in the same way that you can rename sessions, except it's Control B, comma, to do the rename of a window, right? So you can see at the bottom here, it says rename window. I'm just going to rename it to like, I don't know, 2. Because I'm really creative when it comes to naming things, as we've seen on this show many times in the past. Okay, now I'm going to make some additional panes. Let's do Control B and then %, which %, there we go. And then we're going to make another one below this one. Control B, what is it? Double quote, right? So now we've got a couple of windows here. Let's so I was looking at how to cycle between panes. So that's another command that maybe you want to care about. It's Control B O, I think. Control B and then O will just move you to the next pane, right? So you can see based on the green outline of which pane I'm in as to which one I'm in. So let's put top here. I don't know, just so we have something going on in these sessions. Now, if I do a Control B and then the letter W, it gives me a list of the windows that I have open, and I can just select one up or down, right? So you can see I've got 2 separate windows here. If I go back to this one, it just gives me the plain old terminal. That was the one that I started with, right? And if I do Control B, W again, it'll show me that list again. But there's also, you can cycle between these as well. I didn't jot down, I think it's P, Control B. Was it P? Yeah, P is previous window and Control B, was it N? Yes, is next window. So you can switch between windows like that, which I think is also super handy, right? So if you're in that situation that Scott was showing where you have a dozen panes open and they're getting really hard to see, don't forget that you can set up separate windows within Tmux, not just sessions, but windows you can easily cycle between. And then you can have several groups of tabs doing, or several groups of panes doing different things, right? So I thought that was pretty cool. Sorry, go ahead.
So we're talking about SSHing and using Tmux in your SSH session. So you're SSH and you're doing stuff on the shell, and you need to run something else.
Right.
So you open
Yeah.
another window and you run your other thing, and then you can just flip flop between the two windows without having to make another SSH connection and doing all of the setup again.
Right. Right. So, super handy. I did have one other thing I wanted to show you, which is not exactly related to this, but another great thing. We used to do this with Screen, but I wanted to see how to do this with Tmux as well. And that is, so we're going under the assumption here that one of the great powers of Tmux is that you won't lose your session if you get disconnected, right? Well, how many times have you logged into a system and what you wanted to do was start your upgrade or whatever it is that you were there to do, and you forgot to launch Tmux or you forgot to launch Screen before you started the command, right? So what if instead we have Tmux launch automatically when you log in? Right now, I tinkered around with, can I make it my shell? Can I come up with some script that would make it run Tmux as my shell when I logged in? And that got me into some weird situations where, if I like opened a new session, it tried to run Tmux within Tmux, and kind of bad idea. Don't try to do that. But I did find a way to add it to your bash RC. So what we're going to do here, I've made a new user. I call them Tmux user because I thought that would be really, again, super creative. We're just going to edit Tmux users bash RC. So vim tilde Tmux user dot bash RC. Okay, now I'm going to prefix this with, there could be 1,000 other ways to get this done, right? There's some logic that I'm going to run here to make sure that we don't have Tmux running already, that we're not already in a Tmux session. And this should help us prevent that situation where you end up in a loop of Tmux sessions, right? So let me just copy and paste this out of here. We're going to put it at the end of the bash RC. And what this is doing here is it uses an if statement to check, like, is Tmux installed? That's the first thing it's doing here, right? Does Tmux actually exist on this machine? Because if it doesn't, that could be a problem, right? And it's going to, of course, redirect the output of that to dev null. Otherwise, every time you log in, you're going to get some output from that. And then this $Tmux variable, I guess, is a environment variable that Tmux sets, letting you know that you're in a Tmux environment, that Tmux is running and that you're inside of a Tmux session. So that checks, is it already running? And if those two things don't evaluate in the way that we want them to, it doesn't execute this command, right? But if those things evaluate properly, then it'll run Tmux. It'll attach to the session default if the session exists already, or it'll make a new session that is called default. Now you can, of course, change the name of that session if you want to. And the example I found online didn't include this extra line for exit. I added it because what this would do is I would connect to my user and then it would launch Tmux just as expected. But when I exited Tmux, it would bring me right back to a bash prompt. And I thought that would probably be a little annoying, right? Because if I had to log out twice every time I left my shell, that might be annoying. But if you don't want to have it automatically exit the shell when you exit Tmux, just don't include that exit, right? And then, of course, we're closing the if bracket.
And so Nate, you want to be a little bit careful where you put that exit because you're exiting the RC file, right? So you're like stopping your script in the middle.
Yes. So that's, again, I put this all the way at the end, right? So maybe there's a cleaner way to do this. Is there a better way to exit bash instead of exiting the bash RC? I'm not sure. This does work. I did test it. We're not flying by the seat of my pants here. But again, it's at the end of the bash RC. So if it exits the bash RC, as long as you don't put other important things after this, which why would you? Because this is the last thing you're going to want it to run, right? Then, there you go. Okay. So we're going to save that. Again, there could be cleaner ways to get that done. So this was something I threw together at the last minute. All right. So now if we sudo su, actually, I don't even have to sudo because I'm already root, su-tmux user.
So while you're doing that, Shantanu suggested that you would use the run command with SSH. So when you're making your SSH client connection, you actually tell it to run Tmux as your client command.
You could do that too. So the idea,
which then exits this SSH session too.
Yeah, like with everything in Linux, there's a dozen ways to get this done. Probably more than a dozen ways. My thought was I don't want to have to think about it. Like it's 2 in the morning. I'm connecting to my machine to go do my maintenance. I've already forgotten to run screen or to run Tmux, right? This ensures that I'm going to get it done, right? So let's do this. All right, now you can see that I switched over to that user. It brought me right into Tmux, and it brought me right into an active session, or a new session in this case. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to add, what was it, Control B, and then %. We're going to add a separate pane here, and then we're going to run top in here, and you can see that things are happening. This works just like you'd expect Tmux to work. Now, if I were to exit this shell, then of course it would exit the machine and I would log out. But if for some reason I want to keep this running, all I have to do is detach. So Control B and then D. And it didn't only detach me from Tmux, it also brought me back to the user I was in before I switched over to the other user. So you can imagine if I was in an SSH shell, what this would have done is it would have detached from the session and then brought me back to the host that I connected from, right? Now, if I switch back to the Tmux user, it's going to bring me back to that session that I had running, which I think is super handy, right? So imagine maybe this is a shell server that you care about. You have your Tmux session set up the way you want. Instead of exiting all of that when you log out, you could just detach. And when you detach, it brings you back to the host you connected from. So there you go. That's my cool Tmux thing that I discovered. Again, like I said, I was a screen guy. I'm not a huge Tmux guy. So if you guys have suggestions on how to make this work better, say so. And I'm sure there are things in the chat telling me so.
Well, I mean, now that Tmux is the default for RHEL, I guess you are a Tmux guy.
Yeah, only when I have to use it though. I'm going to tell you, right? The Control B sequence, and there's been some chat about this. One, it's hard to reach, right? So you can remap that to change it. In fact, the same guy, LS Dowdle, mentioned that he always remaps it to Control A because it's just easier to reach, easier to type. The other thing was when you're looking at documentation online, it's not always clear that you're supposed to Control B and then let go and then hit the next command sequence, right? So if you're not familiar with that particular vernacular, speaking of $5 words, you have to hit Control B and then let go. It's not Control B and then the key while you're holding Control B. That won't work. So first time I used Tmux, I'm like, what? Why are these not working? And that was why I was doing it wrong.
Yeah, and one of the other viewers asked about like customizing other stuff about a Tmux. It's look, it's fonts, like,
Yes.
and I linked a blog that had a lot of that stuff. And one of the other things covered in the blog is changing the key bindings. So if you don't like Control B and double quote for splitting your screen or your pane horizontally, you can change what that key binding is to do something else. I will caution you though, like that's cool that you're carrying your own super magical config, but now if I have to do something on one of your sessions, I want to murder you because I'm like
Exactly.
Control B thing. It doesn't work.
Why doesn't Tmux work like it's supposed to? Yeah,
Exactly.
because someone remapped it.
It's kind of like that guy that sets the DevRack keyboard layout on all the machines.
Right.
Which is great for that person. But anybody who doesn't know that keyboard layout, like it is extremely painful at 2 a.m, especially at 2 a.m, to try and solve something.
I used to have routine arguments with our web developers about the color scheme for Vim because I used all terminals with dark backgrounds and they used all terminals with light backgrounds, and the default color scheme for Vim worked well for my dark backgrounds because I'm the one that matters, of course, but did not work well for their light backgrounds. So yeah, we would always, they were like, why can't you change this? I'm like, make your own VimRC. I'm the admin.
All right. So I think that was like all the Tmux stuff we want to show today. So
yeah, I think it is. And like I said, there's a lot of deeper things here. There are customizations you can make so that when you launch Tmux, it automatically rebuilds maybe a session that you care about or the types of panes you care about. We didn't really dive into that today. And like I said, there was a bunch of comments about tricks that people are doing in Tmux in the chat today. And I don't know, I think that transcript comes along with when you're watching deferred as well. So keep an eye on that because there's a lot of useful info that scrolled through there.
All right, everybody. Well, next week we'll be talking about pinning yourself to enterprise Linux releases.
Yes.
So how do you do it? What are the considerations? And some of the options. So that's what we'll be covering next week. Look, Nate, we came up with 2 weeks worth of topics. We actually knew
we planned ahead. Now let's see if next week at the end of the show we have the following week planned yet or not. I'm gonna take some bets on that.
That's a future Scott and Nate problem.
That is true. That is true. Well, folks, this has been fun. Like I said, make sure you leave comments with your favorite Tmux commands. If you liked the stream today, make sure you hit the like button and, of course, subscribe if you like this kind of stuff.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great one.